Unaware his pregnant wife had just inherited a billion-dollar empire, he kicked her and her two daughters out into the snow. What she did shocked him. Ryan Dalton's hands were steady as he pushed his pregnant wife Claire and her two daughters, 7-year-old Emma and 4-year-old Lily, out into the December blizzard at exactly 7:04 a.m., watching them stumble into the snow with nothing but 2 garbage bags of clothes and $47. His mistress, Vanessa, stood beside him in Claire's bathrobe, laughing as Claire clutched her 6-month pregnant belly and begged for just enough money to buy formula for the baby when he came. But what Ryan didn't know, what he couldn't have known as he slammed the door on his family and drained their $23,000 joint bank account to fund his wedding to Vanessa next month, was that at that exact moment, Claire had just inherited her grandmother Eleanor Morrison's billion-dollar industrial empire, a letter confirming the $2.3 billion fortune sitting unopened in the coat pocket she was wearing, delivered by courier just 30 minutes before he threw her into the snow. Ryan Dalton believed he was discarding a broke, overweight, worthless woman who had nothing and no one. But what would Ryan discover when he found the second copy of that inheritance letter on his kitchen counter an hour later? What would happen when the pregnant wife he'd just abandoned in a blizzard with her 2 traumatized daughters turned out to own the very company that kept his employer in business? How would Vanessa react when she learned the woman she'd spit on and called a fat cow now controlled a billion-dollar empire? And what revenge had Clare Morrison, granddaughter of one of America's most powerful industrialists, been planning in the 7 weeks between that frozen morning and the day she walked into Ryan's wedding reception, transformed, powerful, and ready to deliver a shock that would destroy him in front of 200 guests? Would the mistress who'd recorded Claire's humiliation still be smiling when she discovered the truth? And would Ryan ever understand that the biggest mistake of his life wasn't just throwing away $1 billion? It was throwing away the 3 people who'd loved him unconditionally? The morning had started 30 minutes earlier when Claire heard the doorbell ring at 6:30 a.m. She'd been in the kitchen making oatmeal for Emma and Lily, her pregnant belly pressing against the counter, her back aching from another sleepless night. Baby James, though she didn't know that would be his name yet, had been kicking all night, as if trying to warn her about what was coming. She'd opened the door to find a courier in a dark suit, holding a thick envelope with a law firm's return address. Peterson, Harrison, and Associates, her grandmother's attorneys. Claire had taken the envelope, thanked the courier, and set it on the kitchen counter next to the stack of unpaid bills Ryan kept complaining about. She'd meant to open it right away, but Lily had spilled her juice and Emma was crying about a bad dream, and the oatmeal was burning, and Claire was so tired, so impossibly tired from carrying this baby and raising 2 daughters and trying to keep Ryan happy, even though nothing she did was ever enough anymore. So the envelope sat there unopened, while Claire wiped up juice and comforted Emma and scraped burned oatmeal into the trash. She didn't know that inside that envelope was a letter that began with the words, "We are pleased to inform you that you are the sole heir to the Eleanor Morrison estate, valued at approximately $2.3 billion. She didn't know that her grandmother, the woman who'd lived in that small apartment in Queens, who'd worn the same winter coat for 15 years, who'd made tea in chipped cups, had been one of the wealthiest women in America. She didn't know that Morrison Industrial Holdings employed 12,000 people across 23 facilities. She didn't know that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't imagine. All she knew was that Ryan was coming down the stairs with papers in his hand and a look on his face she'd never seen before. Cold and final and almost excited, like he'd been waiting for this moment and was relieved it had finally arrived. Vanessa appeared behind him wearing Claire's bathrobe, the silk one Claire's mother had given her before she died, and Claire's stomach dropped because she understood in that instant what was happening. She'd suspected the affair for months now, had seen the texts Ryan tried to hide, had smelled perfume that wasn't hers on his shirts, had noticed how he flinched when she touched him. but she'd told herself she was being paranoid, that Ryan would never do that to her, not when she was pregnant, not when they had Emma and Lily to think about. She'd been wrong. Ryan threw divorce papers on the kitchen table right next to the unopened envelope. "Sign these," he said, and his voice was different now, harder than she'd ever heard it. "I want you out by 7. Claire looked at the clock. It was 6:42. That gave her 18 minutes. "Ryan, please," she started, but Vanessa cut her off. "Save it," Vanessa said, and her voice was sharp and young and cruel. "He doesn't want you anymore. Look at yourself. You're fat, you're pathetic, and you're broke. What man would want that?" Claire's hand went instinctively to her pregnant belly, protecting the baby inside even as the words hit her like punches. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in her pajamas with the unicorns on them, her 7-year-old face confused and scared. "Mommy," Emma's voice was so small. "What's happening?" Ryan didn't look at his daughter. "Go back to your room, Emma." But Emma didn't move. She just stood there watching as her father handed her mother garbage bags and told her to pack. Lily came downstairs then, 4 years old and still half asleep, rubbing her eyes with small fists. She saw Vanessa in their mother's robe and started to cry, that instinctive child's understanding that something was terribly wrong. Claire wanted to go to her daughters, to hold them and tell them everything would be okay. But Ryan was pushing garbage bags into her hands, and Vanessa was laughing, actually laughing, and Claire's mind was spinning, trying to understand how her life had fallen apart in 4 minutes. She grabbed what she could while Ryan stood over her, counting down the minutes. Emma's stuffed rabbit, Lily's favorite book. Maternity clothes that barely fit anymore. The girls' winter coats that were already too small because money had been tight and Claire had been planning to buy new ones after Christmas. She moved through the house in a daze while Vanessa followed her with a phone, recording everything, making comments about Claire's weight and her clothes, and how pathetic she looked scrambling to pack. When Claire tried to grab family photos from the mantel, Vanessa slapped her hand away. "Those stay here. This is Ryan's house now." Claire wanted to argue, wanted to fight, wanted to scream that she'd helped pay for this house, that her name was on the deed too, that these were her memories and her children's memories. But she was so tired and so shocked, and the clock was ticking down, and all she could think about was getting Emma and Lily somewhere safe before Ryan did something even worse. At 6:58, 2 minutes before Ryan's deadline, Claire stood in the kitchen with 2 garbage bags and her daughters clinging to her legs. She looked around at the home she'd lived in for 5 years, at the kitchen where she'd made countless meals, at the table where they'd celebrated birthdays and holidays, at the photographs on the walls showing a family that no longer existed. The unopened envelope sat on the counter where she'd left it 30 minutes ago, but Claire's mind was too fractured to remember it. Ryan saw her looking around and his face twisted with something like satisfaction. "Pathetic," he said. "You're actually going to cry about this? You should be thanking me. I'm doing you a favor. Maybe losing me will finally motivate you to lose some weight." Vanessa stepped forward then, right up close to Claire, so close Claire could smell her expensive perfume. And then Vanessa spit in her face. The warm saliva hit Claire's cheek and dripped down toward her jaw, and for a moment Claire couldn't process what had just happened. No one had ever done something so deliberately degrading to her. She stood frozen, Vanessa's spit on her face, while Ryan laughed. Her husband laughed. Emma screamed and tried to run to her mother, but Ryan caught her and held her back. Lily was crying so hard she could barely breathe, her small body shaking with sobs that seemed too big for someone so little. Claire wiped the spit from her face with trembling hands, grabbed the garbage bags, and reached for Emma and Lily, but Ryan wasn't done yet. "Before you go," he said, pulling out his phone, "check the bank account." Claire fumbled for her phone with shaking hands and opened their banking app. The joint savings account where they kept $23,000, money for Emma's school, for the new baby, for emergencies, showed a balance of zero. "Where?" Claire started, but Ryan cut her off. "In my personal account now. My money. You want something for the kids? Get a job. Though honestly, who's going to hire you looking like that?" The cruelty was so casual, so complete, that Claire felt something crack inside her chest. This was the man she'd loved for 9 years. The man she'd married and built a life with and made children with, and he was stealing from his own daughters and throwing them out into a blizzard without a second thought. Ryan opened the front door and the December cold rushed in, sharp and brutal. Snow was falling in thick sheets, already covering the ground in white. The temperature was below freezing and dropping. Claire grabbed Emma and Lily's hands and stepped toward the door, but her body was moving on autopilot while her mind screamed that this couldn't be real, that any second she'd wake up and this would be a nightmare. At 7:04 exactly, Ryan pushed them out onto the porch. Claire stumbled, barely catching herself, and felt something crinkle in her coat pocket. The envelope. She'd shoved it in there at some point without thinking, some automatic gesture of not wanting to leave anything behind. She pulled Emma and Lily close as Ryan threw the garbage bags onto the lawn. Clothes spilled out into the snow, Emma's favorite dress, Lily's school shoes, Claire's maternity sweaters. The girls were crying so hard they couldn't speak, just making these awful choking sounds that no children should ever have to make. Claire wanted to cover their ears, wanted to shield them from what was happening, but she had nothing to shield them with. She was 6 months pregnant, broke, and being thrown into the snow with her children, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Ryan stood in the warm doorway with Vanessa pressed against him, both of them watching like this was entertainment. "Have a nice life, Claire," Ryan said, and then he slammed the door. Claire heard the lock click. She stood on the lawn with snow already soaking through her thin shoes, Emma and Lily shaking with cold and terror beside her, and tried to understand what she was supposed to do next. She had no money, no car. Ryan had taken her keys and said the car was in his name so she couldn't use it, and no phone plan because Ryan had canceled their family account that morning. She had $47 in her purse and 2 little girls who were looking at her like she had all the answers, like she could fix this, like she was still their mother who could keep them safe. But Claire didn't know how to keep them safe. Not from this. Not from their own father. She looked back at the house one more time and saw a neighbor's curtain move. Mrs. Chen next door was watching, her phone pointed at them. Recording this too, probably. More evidence of Claire's humiliation, more proof that she'd failed so completely that her own husband had to physically remove her from his life. The shame was suffocating, but underneath it, something else was starting to grow. Something hard and cold that matched the December air. Ryan had taken everything from her home, her money, her dignity. He'd traumatized their children and abandoned his unborn son. He'd stolen from his own family and laughed while doing it, but he'd made one mistake. He'd forgotten that Claire Morrison Dalton wasn't just his discarded wife. She was Eleanor Morrison's granddaughter, and the Morrison women didn't break. They waited, they watched, and they won. Claire just had to survive long enough to figure out how. The walk to St. Catherine's Women's Shelter took 2 hours through the blizzard. Claire's feet went numb after the first mile, her thin maternity coat doing nothing against the wind that cut through fabric like it wasn't even there. Emma held one hand, Lily the other, both girls stumbling through snow that came up to their knees. They didn't speak. What was there to say? Their father had just thrown them away like garbage, and 7-year-old Emma and 4-year-old Lily didn't have words for that kind of betrayal yet. Claire didn't either. She just kept walking, one foot in front of the other, because stopping meant freezing and freezing meant dying, and her daughters needed her alive. The baby in her belly kicked weakly, and Claire wondered if he could feel the cold too. If somehow he understood that his father had rejected him before he was even born. By the time they reached the shelter, Claire's lips were blue and her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't grip the door handle. A woman in her 60s opened the door, took one look at Claire's pregnant belly and the two shivering girls, and pulled them inside immediately. "My God," the woman said, wrapping blankets around all three of them. "How long were you out there?" Claire tried to answer, but her teeth were chattering too hard. The woman, her name tag said Maria Santos, director, didn't wait for a response. She called an ambulance while settling Emma and Lily on a couch near a space heater, their small bodies still trembling even as warmth started to seep back in. The paramedics arrived within minutes and told Claire what she already knew in her bones. Another 30 minutes in that cold, and she would have lost the baby. Maybe her own life, too. They took her to the hospital while Maria stayed with Emma and Lily, promising Claire they'd be safe, they'd be fed, they'd be cared for. At the hospital, doctors ran tests and found preeclampsia, dangerously high blood pressure that meant this pregnancy was already at risk even without the hypothermia. A social worker came with questions Claire could barely process. Where was her support system? Dead or gone? Her family? Her grandmother had died 6 months ago. Her husband? The one who'd just thrown her into a blizzard. Resources? None. The social worker's eyes filled with pity, and Claire hated it. Hated being someone who inspired pity. Hated that this was what her life had become. They kept her overnight for observation. And in that sterile hospital room with machines beeping and fluorescent lights buzzing, Claire finally broke. She'd held it together for Emma and Lily, had stayed strong through the walk and the cold and the terror, but alone in that room the sobs came like they'd never stop. Her whole body shook with them, great gasping cries that hurt her throat and made the baby kick in distress. She'd lost everything in 4 hours. Her home, her marriage, her savings, her dignity. Ryan had stripped her life down to nothing and walked away, laughing. And the worst part, the part that made Claire want to scream until her voice gave out, was that Emma and Lily had seen it all, had watched their father choose cruelty, had heard him laugh while another woman spit on their mother, had felt his complete rejection. That trauma would live in them forever, and Claire couldn't protect them from it because she'd been powerless to stop it. The next morning, Maria picked her up and drove them all back to the shelter. Emma still wasn't speaking. Lily cried constantly, these quiet, heartbroken sobs that never quite stopped. Maria gave them a small room with 3 cots and thin blankets, apologizing that it wasn't more, explaining that the shelter was at capacity with 50 women and children all running from their own nightmares. Claire thanked her, got the girls settled, and then sat on her cot, staring at the wall while her mind tried to process the impossible. How was she supposed to rebuild from nothing? How was she supposed to feed 3 children with $47? How was she supposed to afford prenatal care when she had no insurance because Ryan had canceled it? How was she supposed to keep Emma and Lily safe when she couldn't even keep them housed? That night, December 11th, Claire lay awake, listening to Lily whimper in her sleep and Emma's too quiet breathing. The baby kicked weakly, reminding her that time was running out. In 3 months, she'd give birth, and then she'd have an infant to care for on top of everything else. The math didn't work. Nothing worked. At some point, exhausted beyond measure, Claire's hand went to her coat pocket and felt the envelope crinkle. She pulled it out, staring at the return address in the dim light filtering through the curtains. Peterson, Harrison, and Associates, her grandmother's estate. There would be something, probably. Maybe a few $1,000s. Maybe some jewelry Eleanor had saved. It wouldn't solve everything, but it might buy them a month somewhere, might give Claire time to find a job and childcare, and some way forward. She opened the envelope with shaking hands. The letter inside was formal, typed on thick paper, addressed to Claire Morrison Dalton. Her eyes scanned the first line. "We are pleased to inform you that you are the sole heir to the Eleanor Morrison estate, valued at approximately $2.3 billion. Claire read it again. Then again. The words didn't change. $2.3 billion. Her grandmother, Eleanor Morrison, who'd lived in that small apartment and shopped at thrift stores and never seemed to have much money, had been worth billions. The letter went on, explaining trust funds and holdings and Morrison Industrial Holdings, a company Clare had never heard of that apparently employed 12,000 people. There were property deeds and investment accounts and controlling shares in subsidiaries. The list took 3 pages. Claire's hands started shaking so badly she nearly dropped the letter. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But the law firm's letterhead was legitimate, the details too specific to be fake. She Googled Morrison Industrial Holdings on Maria's borrowed phone and found articles, stock listings, annual reports. It was real. All of it. Her grandmother had been a billionaire, and now Clare was too. She'd walked through that blizzard yesterday, worth more than most people could comprehend, and she hadn't even known it. If she'd opened this letter 30 minutes earlier, before Ryan threw her out, everything would have been different. But maybe it was better this way, because now she knew exactly who Ryan was, what he was capable of, without money or power clouding her judgment. Now she could see his true character, and it was monstrous. 7 weeks later, Clare Morrison walked into Ryan's wedding reception at the Riverside Plaza Ballroom wearing a midnight blue gown that cost more than Ryan's entire wedding. Her pregnant belly was elegant at 8 months now, her hair styled by professionals, diamond earrings catching the light. She looked nothing like the woman Ryan had thrown into the snow. She looked powerful. 200 guests filled the ballroom, drinking champagne Ryan couldn't afford, eating food he'd gone into debt to provide, celebrating a marriage that was about to implode. Ryan stood near the bar, sweating in his tuxedo, $64,000 in debt and terrified because he'd found that second inheritance letter on his counter the morning after he'd thrown Clare out. He'd spent 7 weeks trying to find her, trying to stake some claim to the billion. 7 weeks later, Clare Morrison walked into Ryan's wedding reception at the Riverside Plaza Ballroom wearing a midnight blue gown that cost more than Ryan's entire wedding. Her pregnant belly was elegant at 8 months now, her hair styled by professionals, diamond earrings catching the light. She looked nothing like the woman Ryan had thrown into the snow. She looked powerful. 200 guests filled the ballroom, drinking champagne Ryan couldn't afford, eating food he'd gone into debt to provide, celebrating a marriage that was about to implode. Ryan stood near the bar, sweating in his tuxedo, $64,000 in debt and terrified because he'd found that second inheritance letter on his counter the morning after he'd thrown Clare out. He'd spent 7 weeks trying to find her, trying to stake some claim to the billions she'd inherited. But Clare had vanished completely, until now. The venue manager approached Ryan with a tablet, smiling. "Mr. Dalton, the anonymous donor who covered your venue costs wanted to meet you before the ceremony. She's in the Vienna room." Ryan's stomach dropped. He walked toward the private room on shaking legs, opened the door, and found Clare standing by the window. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Clare smiled, cold and final. "Hello, Ryan. Surprised?" Ryan's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Clare stepped closer, each movement deliberate. "I paid for this wedding, the venue, the flowers, the catering, all of it. I wanted you to have one perfect day before you understood the consequences of your choices." "Clare, listen, I've been meaning to call," Ryan started, but Clare cut him off with a look that could freeze blood. "Have you called Emma? Your 7-year-old daughter who didn't speak for 3 days after you threw us out? Have you called Lily? The 4-year-old who wets the bed now because her daddy abandoned her?" Ryan looked away, guilt flickering across his face for half a second before defensiveness replaced it. Clare felt something settle inside her, something that had been waiting for this moment. "I came here tonight to offer you one chance at redemption, Ryan. One chance to be a decent human being." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "Apologize to Emma and Lily. Get on your knees and apologize to your daughters for traumatizing them, for making them think they weren't worthy of love. Do that sincerely, and I'll drop the civil charges. Not the criminal ones, you endangered children, but the financial claims. All of it. Ryan stared at her, and Claire watched the calculation happen behind his eyes. The weight of his debt footage onto the Vienna room screen. December 10th, 7:04 a.m. Ryan throwing garbage bags into the snow, Vanessa spitting on Claire, Emma and Lily crying and pounding on the door, Ryan laughing. The footage played in complete silence, and when it ended, Claire's voice carried to every person in that hallway. For 7 weeks, Ryan told everyone I was mentally unstable, that he had to remove me for everyone's safety. This is the truth. She turned to face the crowd, her hand on her pregnant belly. And there's one more thing you should know. Morrison Industrial Holdings, the company I now control, supplies 40% of the aerospace components for Ryan's employer. That contract is terminated as of today. Ryan's boss made a choking sound. Claire continued, her voice calm and clear. Additionally, Morrison Holdings owns the real estate trust that controls this building. I paid for this wedding because I wanted Ryan to have one perfect day before understanding what he threw away. She walked past Ryan, past Vanessa, past the stunned guests. The Morrison women don't break, Ryan. We rise. And we protect our children. Always. Behind her, she heard Vanessa's voice. This wedding is over. Then Ryan's desperate. Vanessa, wait. But Vanessa was already leaving with Marcus Webb, the groomsman she'd been flirting with all night. Ryan stood alone in the Vienna room, his wedding destroyed, his reputation shattered, his future in ruins. 3 months later, Claire gave birth to James Morrison. Healthy, perfect, 5 pounds 3 ounces. Emma and Lily were there to meet their baby brother, both girls healing slowly through therapy and love and the safety Claire had built for them. Ryan was convicted of child endangerment, sentenced to community service and probation, and lost his job when Morrison Holdings' terminated contract cost his company $140 million. He filed for bankruptcy and moved back with his parents. But Claire didn't spend her days thinking about Ryan's destruction. She spent them building Morrison Industrial Holdings into something even greater than Eleanor had imagined, creating employee benefits and supporting single mothers, and proving that real power wasn't about revenge. It was about protecting the people you loved and rising above the cruelty of people too small to understand what they'd lost. 2 years later, Ryan sent a text apologizing, claiming therapy had changed him. Claire read it once, then deleted it. Not because she was angry, she'd forgiven him months ago for her own peace, not his redemption, but because her daughters were healing and introducing their father back into their lives would risk that healing. Maybe someday when Emma and Lily were older, they could choose for themselves, but not now. Not when they were finally smiling again, finally sleeping through the night, finally understanding that their father's cruelty wasn't their fault. Claire had everything she needed. 3 healthy children, an empire built on integrity, and the hard-won peace of knowing she'd survived the worst and come out stronger. The Morrison women didn't just survive, they thrived. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to our channel and turn on that notification bell so you never miss stories of survival, justice, and redemption. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? And what would you have done in Claire's position? Your story matters. Share it with us.